What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. Here it is Thursday, February 15th, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. So let's get right on into it. The corporate media is still obsessively focused on the school shooting. And don't get me wrong, it was a tragedy. Whether it's the real deal or a false flag, it's still a tragedy. All these people got killed. But I'm starting to wonder, what are we being distracted from? Obviously, the media is not talking about the Uranium One deal. They're not talking about these congressional investigations into the Democrats. They're not talking about the war zones. They're not talking about the Democrats who are still pushing for 100% amnesty for all the illegal immigrants because they need them to vote Democratic. The news is really not being very useful to us. We've all heard this story now, and yet this is all we're getting. 24/7. It's obsessive here. Now, we have received confirmation finally that yes, indeed, Nicholas de Jesus Cruz was on prescription psychiatric medication to deal with his emotional fragility. And there you have it. It's yet another in a long series of these school shooters who are on these medications. And basically, these psychiatric medications have been linked to 90% of the school shootings. And corporate media will not cover it because big pharmaceutical corporations are really good advertisers and they need the money. So they're never going to say anything bad about their clients, no matter what goes wrong. Now, again, there is a website, ssristories.com, and I link to it a lot. And I also reposted my page, Mass Violence Linked to Prescription Psychiatric Medications, a resource page. And the track record is clear. This is not a gun problem. Harris was put on psychiatric drugs. The killer at Northern Illinois University had been prescribed psychiatric drugs. Virginia Tech's shooter was on these drugs. The killer at Stockton was on these drugs. The killer at the Navy Yard was on these drugs. The killer at Fort Hood was on these drugs. The killer at Isla Vista was on these drugs. The killer at Paducah was on these drugs. The killer at UCC was on these drugs. The killer at Aurora. The killer at Tucson. The killer at Tallahassee. Fresno. Jokella. Red Lion. And of course, Nicholas de Jesus Cruz was on these medications as well. And somebody wrote on in and said, you're absolutely right. When we were young, everybody had a gun. There were no mass shootings. What has changed? It's this flood of these medications. And they're sold because they make money, but this one-size-fits-all approach to psychiatric medication is a flawed design. Everybody's brain chemistry is a little bit different. Many years ago, when I was going through the breakup of my first marriage, my doctor recommended I take some antidepressants. And for about 3 weeks there, I was happy and I was fun and I was popular and people were inviting me to parties. And then I had this backlash reaction. I just went into the absolute blackest depression you could imagine. And the only way I got through it is I was literally sitting on the floor in a corner saying, it's the chemicals, it's the chemicals, it's the chemicals, it's the chemicals. So that's what's changed. But corporate media is never going to tell you that. It's time to blame the guns again. Now, apparently, the FBI was alerted last fall that Nicholas Cruz was talking about being a professional school shooter. And last fall, this Mississippi bail bondsman and frequent YouTube vlogger saw this comment left on one of his videos by a user calling themselves Nicholas Cruz. And so the YouTuber alerted the FBI. The FBI came over and talked to him and did nothing. They absolutely did nothing. They took a copy of the screenshot of the comment because YouTube had already pulled it down. That was the last this bail bondsman heard from them. They just walked away. Another wonderful job by the FBI. Now, maybe if they hadn't been working so hard to overthrow a legitimately elected president, they might have stopped this kid before he could pull a trigger. Or given that he was advertising he wanted to be a professional school shooter, maybe the FBI recruited him to be the patsy and a false flag. We don't really know. But what's really interesting is even people in the corporate media, they're sort of politely acknowledging the gun grabber arguments and everything, but even the corporate media is saying this kid was so obviously a danger. Even the students at the school were joking that if anybody shot up the school, it was going to be this kid. And nothing was done. Now, the FBI is trying to get itself out of this embarrassment. The FBI Special Agent in Charge, Robert Lasky, basically came on out and said that the Nicholas Cruz that was commenting on YouTube, they didn't know who it really was. They couldn't track him down. That's a pathetic excuse. I am sorry. No, you botched this one. You botched it like you botched the attack on Pearl Harbor. You botched it like you botched the lyrics on Louie Louie. This is another FBI screw-up, unless it's a false flag. And they recruited this kid, knowing that he was on these prescription medications, and it's easy to talk somebody on these medications into doing stuff like this. Because there's one common factor, especially in the SSRIs, you've got no impulse control whatsoever. I remember one of the stories over at ssristories.com is talking about a kid who tried to commit suicide. And they got to him in time when it was all over, and they said, "Why'd you do it?" And he said, "I don't know. It just popped into my head, and I went forward with it." All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and we're going to grab a couple of phone calls. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. This shooting from yesterday is on my mind. I'm not buying the official narrative that this was a lone gunman.
I'm not either. There's already one witness out there saying there had to be at least a second shooter.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm really not buying that this. Well, first off, I'll say this: instead of the FBI investigating Trump and the Russian collusion, where were they investigating this guy? If this guy actually was out there and was on the FBI's radar, why didn't he get a visit? And at least an interrogation. I feel like the FBI has dropped the ball on that. Absolutely believe that this guy was a cutout, or at least used or set up. But it's just none of this makes sense. And I'm going to say this too. Remember what Adam Schiff said a few days ago, the release of the Nunes memo. If you release this, there is going to be, Oklahoma-style attacks and mass shootings, in the United States. So I actually lay the blame on Adam Schiff for coming out and saying this, because he warned. He knew something. This is definitely a deep state operation. Not only to come after the guns, but I think to also distract from Obamagate.
Yeah, definitely. It's a distraction from Obamagate and from the wars and for the push for 100% amnesty for all the illegals and everything. And there are indications, again, that this is another Sandy Hook. Apparently, some news stories identifying the gunman hit the wires before the event actually happened. We've had some more of that again. We have one witness who says that there had to be one other shooter because she was with this Nicholas Cruz, talking with him when gunfire sounded from the other side of the campus. And by the way, the witness is saying he was not carrying an AR-15 at that time. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
And at this point, I don't trust anything coming out of the government or the corporate media, and neither should you.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And we just got to keep looking back. these people like Adam Schiff and Phil Mudd and Nancy Pelosi, these are people warning of false flag attempts. Oh, if you release this or do this, there's going to be imminent attacks. These people are behind it. Not only do I lay the blame with the FBI on dropping the ball and investigating this guy, which they probably should have, but I also lay the blame on these congressmen and women and the deep state, because obviously this is serving a double-barred, triple-barred agenda here. This is exactly what I had thought, or the card that I thought the deep state would actually pull, was something like this. It's also being reported that this Nicholas Cruz was also part of a white nationalist. So there's your race war implementation, as was speaking in the WikiLeaks. So, there's, a couple agendas going on here. Don't buy the story. I don't 100% buy the story that this guy would even fired a shot. But, who knows? Okay,
yeah. It's a bit of a mess, and I'm going to be commenting on a lot of that stuff here in the coming minutes. Anyway, listen, Kevin, I need to let you go. The phone lines are loading up, and I got to take some more phone calls. We're going to take one from Fran in Washington. Aloha, Fran. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, nui nui, Michael.
Aloha, nui nui.
Hey, long time since I called in. I also I have a take on this shooting, but
yes.
It's like the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. After I read your blog today and looked at the mugshot of Cruz, I noticed that he had really big ears sticking out. And after being bullied in school most of my life, I kind of think he was bullied about his appearance, and possibly the people that got shot bullied him. But nobody's talking about that. One of your blog posts said, a teacher had trouble with him for a couple of years before this. Well, what kind of trouble?
Well, here's the situation. Here's the situation. Nicholas de Jesus Cruz is Cuban, and apparently he and his younger brother were adopted by an American couple who unfortunately have passed away. One of them only last November. And he was living with another family for a while, and then he moved into a mobile home with a friend not too long ago. So he's had a very troubled upbringing, and the school itself was in a neighborhood that's mostly upper middle class white people. And so he was probably being bullied over his being Hispanic. And I know how that can be, because when my family moved from New Hampshire to Southern California, I got teased about my accent, speaking like a New Englander. And when I was still in New Hampshire, I got teased because I didn't look like a local, because my father had come from Shanghai, China. So I understand how that can work. And kids will bully over all kinds of reasons. But, I didn't pick up a gun and start shooting these people. So I think it's the medication. The medication, you have poor impulse control. So when you get that impulse to start shooting people, you just go with it. Now, obviously, in the case of Nicholas Cruz, there was premeditation. He was prepared. He got his magazines. He got his AR-15. And this was a plan that he was working on and he carried out. Anyway, Fran, need to let you go. Sorry for the brief call, but okay, I want to get on to the next call right now. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, keeping in mind that when they carry out these false flags, they a lot of times have a drill going on. And I understand there was a fire drill and people didn't know what was really going on. So I'm kind of looking at this thing a little bit as possible that maybe I should correctly with the medication, SSRIs, and they just found the perfect kid that was disturbed, and they funded him, fueled him, and pushed him in the right direction. And, of course, used that school drill to confuse people. So I'm kind of looking at that direction right myself.
Well, the story, as I've got it right now, is there actually had been a real fire evacuation drill earlier in the day. And then apparently when the shooting started, somebody in the administration just said, hit the alarm. They're already primed to leave the campus when they hear that. And that was the reason for the confusion as to whether there was one drill or two, or if the shooter himself pulled that second alarm.
Right. Well, I fully expect the mainstream media to exhaust this for, I don't know how long they can carry out this their coverage on this whole thing. But yes, you're right. It is a diversion away from where we were, and talk about Uranium One and numerous other things. And until the next false flag or next event happens, they'll keep pushing us in that direction and away from Hillary and her crimes, no doubt about it.
Well, that only works for people who are actually watching the corporate media, and right now their audience numbers are in the Al-Qaeda. And people are turning to the independent media to find out what's going on. And yes, we're going to be talking about Uranium One. We're going to be talking about pay for play. We're going to be talking about Hillary Clinton and her arrogance. We're not letting go of any of that stuff. I want to see her in jail.
Oh, no, independent media, definitely not. No. I haven't heard too much more about Andrew McCabe and his correspondence of the plan. And I think that really needs to be really pushed out there, because, it's solid. It's solid, showing that they had a backup plan. And I think they need to really go after that. Definitely go after that.
Well, Judicial Watch is after all of his texts, and the FBI is just flat out refusing to release them.
Right. Well, they got something to hide then, don't they?
Yes, they do.
They do. Hey, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and getting on back to this Florida shooting. And no, we're not letting go of those other scandals. So here's what we know so far. Okay, his name was Nicholas de Jesus Cruz, according to multiple news sources. The left-wing corporate media isn't reporting his full name because it does sound Hispanic. They're trying to imply that he's just another white guy like Tom Cruise. And according to the Florida registration database, he's a registered Democrat. That's going to be a little embarrassing for the liberals, who identifies as Hispanic. Now, he's been receiving mental health treatments in a mental health clinic, according to the Boston Globe. He was on prescription psychiatric medication, just like nearly every other school shooter we've seen over the past 2 decades. And the reason we don't say 100% of them were on these medications is because now they're withholding that. They don't want that information to get on out. There was a big stink up in Connecticut after Sandy Hook, where people wanted to know what medications that shooter was on. And the government said, no, that's personal information. You don't need to know that. Yeah, I need to know it if I'm on that same medication. And he did purchase that firearm, the AR-15. He passed a background check in order to do it. And he was into guns and knives. And he followed resistance groups on social media, including Syrian resistance and Iraqi fighters. And apparently some of his YouTube chat room discussions involved the building of bombs, something you really wouldn't want to put on the media. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There's a white nationalist group called the Republic of Florida, and they're acknowledging Nicholas Cruz was a member. Ooh, let's tarnish the white nationalists. Frankly, this feels like another made-up group. This is all coming from the Anti-Defamation League, which has a long history of creating the enemies that it uses to raise funds with. Big stink back in the 1930s, turned out the ADL was actually financing the American Nazi Party. So they could say, look at the Nazis, you got to give us money. So anyway, the head of this Republic of Florida was out there saying that we want an ethnic white state here, but that Cruz was a member and went on out and participated in some of their military-style drills. Here's the problem I have with this. A white nationalist group has an Hispanic as a member? I don't think so. This feels like a put-up job. Just more propaganda. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're still talking about the Florida shooter. Don't worry, we got lots of other stuff to do in the rest of the show here. But everybody's hopping on board and pounding this for all they're worth, for whatever agenda they're pushing. And so Share Blue's Eric Boehlert is already out there screaming that the NRA is taking money from Russia. The Russians are behind this arming of the American people. The Russians want to see America drowning in guns and killing ourselves off. That's a little bit out there. That is really a little bit out there. The reason Americans are killing themselves and each other are these prescription psychiatric medication. Now, here's where the story gets really kind of murky, and I've actually gotten this from about 4 or 5 different sources right now. According to a student from this high school, was interviewed on the Alex Jones show early today, United States Secret Service personnel visited the school several weeks before to change the security protocols. And I got an email here from somebody who was apparently at the school when the Secret Service was there. And she went to use her cell phone to call her mother, and the teacher took the cell phone away and said, "You don't tell anybody about this. You don't tell anybody about the Secret Service being here." Now, there is a student, Alexa Meadnick, and she was interviewed on TV saying that at one point she was actually talking with Nicholas Cruz. He did not have a gun at the time, and they heard gunshots from another part of the campus. So unless it's a put-up job, this is an indication there were additional or other shooters on that campus. And another report I got that I haven't been able to confirm is saying there were at least 3 gunmen on that campus. All right, let's take a phone call from Sal Jr. in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Sal dropped. Okay. All right, we'll do that. So again, they're still totally obsessively focused on this. What are we not being told? What are they not reporting while they obsess about this Florida shooting? Because news means reporting all the news. Yes, what happened in Florida is terrible. But there's also the Uranium One scandal. There's the results of these congressional investigations. There's the result of Judicial Watch investigations. We are hovering perilously close to a major global war. Not getting a word about any of that on the corporate media. Okay, getting on to other politics here. Kim Jong-un is praising South Korea's impressive and sincere Olympic welcome. And Kim Jong-un is saying it's important to boost the warm climate of reconciliation after meeting with the delegation that returned to the North after visiting the South for the Winter Olympics. And Kim Jong-un also expressed satisfaction over their visit, and efforts made by Seoul to prioritize their visit were very impressive, including their sincere efforts for which he gave his gratitude. And don't forget, South Korea, in defiance of the sanctions, picked up the check for the entire North Korean Olympic team and the cheerleaders, all of them, 400 people. They just picked up the check and said, we're going to pay for it all. And it's very obvious that left to themselves, the Koreas are going to reunify. And obviously this is going to send absolute panic into the hearts of the war machine, the warmongers in this country. They want a war. They want to keep the Korean War going. It's only been 60 years. One of the reasons they want to get back in there and finish off North Korea is the realization that the United States, that's a war the United States didn't win. Didn't lose, but we didn't exactly win. It's not like Vietnam where we got our clocks cleaned. Now, getting on to the domestic corruption. There's an article here that came out of Restore American Glory, and it's saying that what we're seeing happen, where you had high-level officials at FBI, Department of Justice, literally create and implement a plan for a coup d'etat against an elected president. This is something that you expect to see in the third world or in the former Soviet Union. You don't expect to see that. And with the United States, this kind of corruption. And they're absolutely right. We cannot tolerate this. We have to have a zero tolerance policy saying, no, we will not accept this kind of behavior. All of these people are supposed to be working for us, not themselves. And all we're getting are nothing but more lies and more corruption and more corruption and more lies. And if you're like me, you got to be sick and tired of it all by now. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And basically, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes was being interviewed on Sean Hannity's show on Fox News. And Devin Nunes said that, yeah, there was collusion with Russia in 2016, but it was all the Democrats. There are all these clear links from the Democrats to Russia. Now, Robert Mueller has been working at his so-called investigation, his witch hunt, his hatchet job, for a year. He's spent $10 million. Virtually everybody on his staff is a known, confirmed Trump hater. This is not an objective, unbiased investigation. This is an attempt at a coup d'etat. So, article over in the nationalinterest.org. Why are the Democrats so obsessed with Russia? Well, there's the obvious war agenda, but I think what it is, it's the only card they've got left to play. They've overplayed the gender card. They've overplayed the abortion card. They've overplayed the race card. They don't really have any ideas to take into an election. It's just blame Russia for everything. And if you are fair Americans, you will give us what we want because Russia took it all away from us. But they are obsessed. Our entire government has become obsessed with Russia. And this article says the same thing I said the other day. It's become disturbingly reminiscent of the McCarthy era in the 1950s, where there were Reds everywhere. Anyway, let's take a phone call here. Rick in Fort Lauderdale, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, long-time listener. Been in government service for a while, doing the private executive protection work. Hey, I just want to touch on something real quick. There's some commentary about the quote-unquote Secret Service redoing the security policies. I just want to touch on that real quick. The guys that I used to roll with and did some 1099 work with, it's called doing business as. They're not Secret Service, okay? There's no such thing as an NSA agent who will ever approach you with NSA documents and say, hi, I'm an NSA agent. There also is no such thing as a CIA agent who's going to do the same thing.
Well, I beg to disagree. Many years ago, when I was just getting started on all this stuff back before I had to leave Southern California, I actually got a phone call from the NSA. And it was a purely technical question. They were trying to track, there'd been a disruption in the internet, and they wanted me to look at it from the other side. And I guess I was already under surveillance at that point because they knew exactly where to find me. So, anyway, back to your story.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I understand that, but that's a whole different point of origin of what they're doing. My point is, if they're out and they're going to facilitate an operation, they're not going to advertise that they're with the CIA. They do carry multiple IDs, and I know this firsthand because I was one of those people that worked parallel to them. Mm-hmm. And so what you're looking at is a different agency. So they're not Secret Service. I don't know who they are, and I'm not doubting the story. But if it's what I think it is, it's a hell of a lot more nefarious than Secret Service.
Well, if they're not real Secret Service, and I understand the Secret Service's primary duties are the protection of the president and finding counterfeiters and stuff like that, and it would be unusual for them to be working security at the school. But if it's not really Secret Service, then my first thought is it's FBI setting this whole thing up, making sure that they know the routes in and out of the school.
There you go. You got it.
Okay?
You hit the nail on the head, Mike. Yep, you got it. You got it right.
Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. A lot of duplicitousness going on. Now, Hillary Clinton apparently had an interview with Mother Jones. She's surfaced again. And she's out there returning to an old theme that any attempt to prosecute her would be like a dictatorship, like some authoritarian regime, because after all, I have done absolutely nothing wrong. Yes, Hillary, you have. And justice demands that you be prosecuted. Even former FBI Chief James Comey admitted on TV you violated sections of Title 18, felony violations. So don't come off, trying to act like being prosecuted represents the act of a tyrant or a dictator. It represents an act of justice, long, long overdue. Tucker Carlson is out there again reminding us that there are no proven facts in that Steele dossier, the one about Donald Trump in Russia. It's all basically hearsay. It's made up. We don't even know for sure that there really were Russian sources for any of this stuff. We do know that some of the allegations in the dossier were fed to Steele by people on Hillary Clinton's campaign. It's just made up out of thin air. So, as I mentioned before, Judicial Watch is having a very tough time getting the text messages of the former number 2 FBI official McCabe, who ran the Clinton and anti-Trump investigations despite clear conflicts of interest. And the FBI is steadfastly refusing to turn over any text messages. And as that caller said, it's flashing a semaphore. Got something to hide. Cover up, cover up, cover up, cover up, cover up. Now, getting back on over to the Schiff memo. This was a little bit of political machinations that was designed to try and make Donald Trump look bad. And the way it was set on up, you remember when the Nunes memo first came on out, Democratic Representative Adam Schiff was out there scaremongering, saying we've crossed a deeply regrettable line, and that the memo was going to reveal sources and methods and create the atmosphere for another domestic terrorism incident. So he must have known what was being planned for the school. Now, as it turns out, the Nunes memo did not expose any sources or methods. The Democrat rebuttal did. And so this Schiff memo was sent to the White House for Donald Trump's decision on whether to release it or not. And Donald Trump said, no, we can't release it. It's got sources and methods in there, at which point the Democrats were out there saying, see, it proves he's got something to hide. He's covering it up. But it was a big old bear trap. They deliberately put stuff in the memo that would lead to Donald Trump having to say, this cannot be made public, you've got to rewrite it. And now Adam Schiff is admitting that his memo contained sources and methods, after all that wailing about how the Nunes memo was going to expose sources and methods. So it's more hypocrisy, more double standards. Getting on back to Andrew McCabe, apparently he's now under investigation for sandbagging the Clinton inquiry. And when McCabe was asked to leave the Bureau, the media was certain it was another Comey firing. Here goes the renegade president again, firing everyone who might have a chance of connecting his campaign to the Russian government officials. It turns out, though, that McCabe was the biased creep conservatives had been warning he was. The Washington Post broke a story reporting that McCabe has been under investigation by the Justice Department's Inspector General for months for basically sitting on some of these emails from Hillary's server and from Anthony Weiner's laptop and not allowing them to move forward into the investigation. Now, there was this lady, Meloise Richardson, and she admitted in 2013 to voting 6 times for Obama's re-election while working as a poll worker in Hamilton County, Ohio. And she was convicted on state voter fraud charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. And Richardson served 8 months before the George Soros-funded Ohio Justice and Policy Center helped lessen her sentence to probation. And Richardson came on out at a rally with Ohio Democrats who treat her like the conquering hero for voting for Obama 6 times. Al Sharpton publicly hugged her. And there is a message in there that the Democrats are perfectly comfortable with election fraud. In fact, they're dependent on it now. That's why they're trying to get amnesty and citizenship for the illegal immigrants, or at least have them stick around until the midterm elections. There was that Democratic Party official came out 3 weeks ago and literally admitted they are dependent on illegal immigrant voters to hang on to power, even though illegal immigrant voters are not allowed to vote under our laws. Now, over at BuzzFeed, they have launched a lawsuit against the Democratic National Committee. And the reason for that is that, as you know, BuzzFeed ran that now discredited Steele dossier, which included the name of a Russian tech executive, Alexei Gubarev, and claimed that he was using his web hosting companies to hack into the DNC's computer systems. Now, this is all without any substantiation whatsoever, and they just accused Gubarev's U.S.-based global web hosting companies, XBT and Webzilla, of planting digital bugs, transmitting viruses, and conducting altering operations against the Democratic Party leadership. Now, Gubarev is basically threatening to sue BuzzFeed because BuzzFeed was the one who made the dossier public. BuzzFeed, in turn, is now turning around and suing the DNC for proof they were hacked. Because remember, nobody has actually done a forensic examination of the DNC servers. Nobody. Not the police, not the FBI, not the NSA, not the CIA. Nobody has done a forensic examination to verify they were bugged or that they were hacked. The only source for the claim that they were hacked by Russia came from CrowdStrike, and they later retracted that claim after criticism from other companies saying that their methods were sloppy and questionable. But we're overdue for some justice on that issue. And again, the timestamps on all the files removed from the DNC's email server, they're too fast for an internet hack. They were copied onto a flash drive, probably by Seth Rich. Now, over at the Department of Justice, Bruce Orr apparently tried to conceal his wife's Fusion GPS payments from ethics officials. Apparently, Fusion GPS was paying his wife. And after the information came on out, Orr was demoted. And, of course, this involves the falsification of government ethics documents, which can result in jail time. This really is worse than Watergate, and we're still not out of it yet. Okay, another scandal involving another Clinton mega donor. And apparently this has to do with a male escort named Gamel Moore, 26-year-old, was found dead at the home of 63-year-old Ed Buck, who's donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to Hillary Clinton. And, of course, it's not getting a lot of media coverage because we can't say bad things about the Democrats. And the family and friends are trying to get a proper investigation done. One of the witnesses interviewed by police said that Gamel Moore told her someone whose name is conveniently redacted tied him up over a year ago and held him against his will at the residence in West Hollywood. Moore also kept a journal in which he described in graphic detail how Ed Buck forced him to do meth and got him addicted. So it's another case of these very rich Democrat donors thinking that they are somehow above the law. And we need to correct that perception. We can't have anybody in this country, we can't have anybody in the government thinking they're above the law, because we're a nation of laws, not of powerful individuals. Now, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency has been criticized for months about taking first-class flights at taxpayer expense. And if you've ever flown first class, you know how much more that costs. But apparently this is a frequent occurrence. He frequently flies at premium class flights at taxpayer expense. And he's now come on out with an excuse saying that he needs to fly first class because people are mean to him in the coach section. That's it. That's his excuse. Now, I want to talk about this dual citizen problem. Most countries will not allow a dual citizen or a foreign citizen a position in the government. The United States is rather unique in that it allows people who are citizens of Israel as well as the U.S. To serve in politics. And the list is a long one. Attorney General Michael Mukasey, Head of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff, Chairman of the Pentagon's Defense Policy Board Richard Pearl, Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, Undersecretary of Defense Douglas Feith, National Security Council Advisor Elliot Abrams. The list goes on and on and on, and I suggest that you read it. It is a huge list. And it involves senators, members of the House of Representatives, and it points out something interesting. All these dual citizens, with one exception, are Democrats or independents. Eric Cantor is the only one who is a GOPer. Actually, he's in the Tea Party. But they seem to be drawn to the Democratic Party. All right. Now, getting on over to the war zones, and there's a lot going on in the war zones. Israel is now claiming that last Saturday's attack has destroyed half of Syria's air defenses. I have absolutely no doubt that Russia is already flying in replacements. But Israel's out there talking very, very tough. And what's really interesting is Assad apparently has decided not to go through with his threat to launch a missile attack against the Ben Gurion airport. And partly that would be, well, that would be wise because it is a civilian airport for the most part. And Assad is trying to maintain the high ground of military against military, not against civilians. The other side, the U.S. side, the Israeli side, they don't hesitate about killing civilians at all. All right, we're going to be taking another break here for commercials, and we'll be right back. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the war. We're talking about what's going on in Syria. And as I said before the break, Israel is now claiming that their major attack has destroyed half of Syria's air defenses. I'm not sure I buy that, but again, I'm sure that Russia is resupplying even as we speak. Now, a lot of people are starting to wonder what exactly is happening with all of these claims of massive Russian casualties, where the U.S. was saying they'd killed over 100, they'd killed scores, all these superlatives to sound like they're winning, and Russia's foreign ministry is coming on out and said, yes, there have been some Russian individuals killed, but these large numbers are obviously inflated, and the recommendation, a prudent one, to stop paying attention to American corporate media because they're unreliable and untruthful, untrustworthy, and so on. Syrian air defenses, the ones that Israel did not destroy, are continuing to confront Israeli spy drones, which raises the question of whether that really was an Iranian drone that penetrated in, that started this whole exchange of hostilities. But apparently, Syrian anti-aircraft guns have confronted numerous Israeli reconnaissance aircraft over the southwestern Quneitra province, forcing them to retreat. So it's getting serious over there. Now, apparently, over this last weekend, the U.S. attacked again, destroying a Russian T-72 tank in eastern Syria with a drone strike, a Reaper drone, killing the crew of 3. Now, this gets very, very serious when you have the military forces of the U.S. and Russia in conflict. This is the first time the U.S. and Russia have been directly in conflict since Vietnam. And we lost that one. Story coming out of antiwar.com. Animosity towards the U.S. brings Turkey, Russia, and Iran together for a summit on Syria. This is a continuation of a pattern that we have been seeing for quite a long time. The rest of the world is turning against the United States government. They don't see the U.S. as a champion of human rights. They don't see us as a moral leader anymore. We're just a big planetary bully with a lot of things that go bang. And every time the U.S. goes on out with its failed foreign policy of just thumping their chest and issuing demands, more countries pivot away from the United States and pivot toward Russia and China. What's really interesting about this summit on Syria is the U.S. is demanding to be allowed in. And Turkey, Russia, and Iran and Syria are saying, no, this is none of your business. You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be in Syria. Now, over in Lebanon, it looks like there may be an escalation there. We're going to talk about that when we come back from station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking about Lebanon, and Israel is starting to make, basically ramp up the war talk regarding Lebanon. Part of it is water, the Litani River, but the other part of it is that Lebanon has apparently made a major oil and gas discovery off their coastline. And the Russian oil company is coming on in. Novatek is coming forward to bid for rights to actually drill and develop this oil resource. And apparently part of this deal is that Russia and Lebanon will move closer together diplomatically, politically, military cooperation. And the reason this is tense is because Israel is claiming that they own the ocean floor off the coast of Lebanon. In fact, Israel has actually come on out and said they own the ocean floor of the entire eastern Mediterranean, and to heck with all the other countries there. They just want it all. They deserve it all. Now, here's where things are getting a little bit dangerous. Over in Great Britain, there is this British colonel, Glenn Grant. And he used to work as an advisor in the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. And apparently he is out there urging the Ukrainian Navy to sink Russia's Black Sea fleet. Now, this Colonel Grant has to know that really will crank up World War III. Personally, I don't think Ukraine stands a chance against the Russian Black Sea fleet. Now, the U.S. has approached Russia and asked Russia to use its leverage over Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to end the conflict. Here's where the wording gets interesting. Russia can push the regime to commit to seeking a real peace in Syria. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, told a Security Council meeting. And she said, now's the time for Russia to use that leverage to push the Assad regime to do what it plainly does not want to do. What Nikki Haley is talking about, of course, is for Assad to step down. They're back to that regime change issue. And no, Russia's not going to help with that. They destroy their own credibility in the process. Now, there's an Israeli movie called Foxtrot. It was produced in Israel. It's making the rounds of the film festivals. And the government of Israel wants to boycott this movie made in Israel. because it shows Palestinian deaths being covered up by Israeli soldiers. And Israel has already come on out and said that this is anti-Semitic propaganda. And it doesn't appear to be. I'm certainly going to look at this movie if it makes it over here. My guess is probably there will be no distribution here in the United States of America. Now, Avalat Shaked, the Israeli justice minister, has come on out and basically said that Israeli apartheid is real and ties directly to Zionism. And she said, there is a place to maintain a Jewish majority even at the price of violation of rights. This is being reported in Haaretz. And Shaked was speaking about Israel's nation-state of the Jewish people bill and made it clear that equality was essentially anathema to the Jewish state. Now, on the coalition's intent to keep the word equality out of the nation-state bill, Shaked said that Israel is a Jewish state. It is a state of all of its nations. That is, equal rights to all citizens, but not equal national rights. In other words, they're basically declaring themselves to be an apartheid state. Just like South Africa, which is no longer around. There we are. Now, over at the New York Times, they ran an article right on the front page claiming that Gaza's misery right now is entirely the fault of the Gazans. That infighting among the Palestinian leadership is the reason there is so much starvation and shortages of everything. I mean, never mind the fact that Israel has kept Gaza in a starvation blockade for decades. Never mind the fact that the U.S. has cut off funding to the Palestinian leadership because the Palestinian leadership dared to criticize Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And what was really interesting is this entire article is a manifesto from Hasbara Central, the Israeli propaganda arm, and they quote an Israeli general extensively by reporter David Halbfinger. But United Nations and human rights officials were not interviewed for this article at all. It's a propaganda piece from the New York Slimes. And then the New York Slimes wonders why they're losing readership. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Apparently, Japan and the U.S. have vowed to increase pressure on North Korea, telling Kim Jong-un that meaningless dialogue will no longer be tolerated. And I presume that what they mean by meaningless dialogue is any dialogue in which Kim Jong-un says, I'd like you to leave us alone. This is more of the United States foreign policy of thumping the chest and just issuing demands and threatening major war if they're not obeyed immediately. I think the two Koreas are going to reunify. And at that point, the whole war agenda is off. What is the U.S. going to do? Declare war on South Korea? I really doubt that. Article out of Investment Watch blog, Reality Check. Will sanctions against North Korea really work? And the answer is no. All sanctions do is harm civilians. Not just in the targeted country, but other countries that do business with the targeted country. We saw that with the sanctions against Russia. They harmed farmers and manufacturers all over Europe. Huge amounts of misery and suffering, just so our political leaders can thump on their chest and act like they're really big people. Down in Yemen, Saudi Arabia has killed 10,000 civilians. Not a word about that in the corporate media, who are still covering nothing but the Florida school shooting. Story coming out of thehill.com. The U.S. Navy has fired an entire unit's command leadership after the unit's executive officer was found drunk and walking around naked in the woods. This happened over in Okinawa, Japan. And I don't know why they're upset. The Japanese don't have the same attitude about nudity that Americans do. Americans are so uptight. But apparently the other commanders tried to basically cover it up. And they were let go as well. So here we are, drunk and walking around naked in the woods in Okinawa, Japan. Yeah, we're really prepared to fight a war against Russia and China. There's definitely a major problem with the Navy. Between the Fat Leonard scandal, which got something like 60 admirals, 6-0, then you have all of these incidents of inexperienced, badly trained crews ramming other ships with their warships. And now this story. Boy, the Navy sure isn't what we're all told it is on movies. This is not exactly Mr. Roberts' material here. Now, yesterday was not only Valentine's Day, it was also Ash Wednesday, and it was also the anniversary of the firebombing of Dresden, Germany. And Dresden was packed with helpless Christian refugees fleeing the Soviet army. And Dresden's native Lutheran and Catholic children were aboard a train that got machine gunned so badly blood was pouring out of the wreckage. And of course, Dresden itself was just reduced to ashes. Perfect way to celebrate Ash Wednesday. Now, most people are unaware of what happened in Dresden. They're unaware that it was carried out primarily to shock and awe the people of Germany. There wasn't a military reason to firebomb Dresden. Dresden was an art city. Dresden was all about crafts. Dresden, China was the envy of all Europe. There were no munitions plants. There were no military bases. It was firebombed just to make a point that we can firebomb whoever we want. But nobody remembers it. Because after all, these are just Christians. It's not like they're Jews, right? They're the wrong race and religion, and that's why we're going to forget all about them here. Okay, on to the economic news. The dollar is basically tanking with the trade deficits. We had the caller who called in the other day talking about the absolutely out of control trade deficits. And this is something that these globalists don't seem to understand. You can't have a nation that is nothing but consumers, because eventually they're going to run out of money. And I thought the trade imbalance was $1.5 billion a day. Apparently, it's now much worse than that. And a lot of people on Wall Street are now starting to talk about stagflation, a new stagflation cycle, and a new recession. Now, because of the new GOP tax laws, Fannie Mae needs another U.S. taxpayer-funded bailout. First one since 2012. And apparently their losses were driven by a $6.5 billion loss in the fourth quarter, which came as a result of a drop in the value of assets Fannie can use to offset taxes. The assets became less valuable when Congress cut the corporate tax rate, resulting in a $9.9 billion hit. So Fannie just goes back to the taxpayers and says, please make it all better. Here's another very interesting story. This is significant. Saudi Arabia is now starting to boost their investments in the Russian economy. They've already put something like $2 billion into Russia. Saudi Arabia invests a lot of money in the United States as part of the petrodollar deal, but they may be looking at the actual return and whether or not their investments are still safe here. Now, all the way back during the S&L collapse, George Herbert Walker Bush was sending a message to the rest of the world that you could park your money inside the United States of America, and if you made money, you got to keep it. If you lost money, the taxpayers would cover it. That's economic fascism, and that's what that whole exercise was about. When the S&Ls collapsed, they went around here with the Resolution Trust Corporation, with a checkbook full of taxpayer money, and they paid off all those accounts. And we were all told, well, these are accounts of retirees and orphans and widows, and they're suffering people. And no, that's nonsense. The vast majority of these accounts were numbered, brokered corporate accounts. Some of them were being used by the CIA to launder the money that they were making off all that cocaine flying into Arkansas. That's another story entirely. But that's why that was done, to reassure other countries that economic fascism had come to the United States and it was a no-lose situation. But there's a problem here. The American people have run out of money. And along with the GOP tax cuts, I'm sure a lot of these other foreign investors, foreign banks, foreign heads of states are starting to wonder if the U.S. is actually able to keep that promise. And that may be the reason why Saudi Arabia is starting to pivot away toward the Russian economy, because the Russian economy is strong. Remember, they tried to wreck it with the oil price war, and it turned out to be a lot more resilient than anybody expected. It also forced Russia to become more independent, self-sufficient, and that's a good thing. Yes, Russia is an oil and gas producer, but they also manufacture, and they're also an agricultural superpower with their decision to avoid GMOs. Everybody on Earth who wants to eat GMO-free food, they're heading for those Russian marketplaces right now. Meanwhile, in another sign of a pivot away from us, Russia is teaming up with China to participate in the initial public offering of Saudi Arabia's energy giant Aramco. In other words, China and Russia are coming on in as partners, and they are basically going to be buying huge numbers of shares in Saudi Arabia's Aramco. Okay. Now, Trump is out there threatening what he calls retaliatory actions against China and South Korea. And basically, he's complaining about the fact that China produces nearly half of the world's steel. And he's accusing China of flooding the market in order to keep its economy robust at home, which actually makes common sense. So Trump's attitude now is that China needs to cut production in order that the United States steel factories can come on back and sell their steel at a higher price. And any action that Trump does, China will do the same. We're in a trade war. And here's what's going on. At the end of World War II, during the 50s, the glorious 50s, other countries came to the United States and they bought American steel because we made the best steel. And it was worth the extra money that it cost. But over time, as American corporations have cheapened their products or shut the factories down completely, we're not competitive. We're not making steel that's better than what China is making. And so anybody who needs to buy steel, they're going to go where they're going to get the best price and the best performance of their product. That's how you maintain a strong, robust economy. Good products, quality products. You're making the best of whatever, better than anybody else in the world, and the world will be a path to your door. If you're out there peddling junk at a high cost, you're not going to do very well. And now Trump is out there, again, thumping his chest and saying, you do what we tell you to do. All right, let's see. Yes, I got that. Now, Trump has, we get this taken care of. Okay. Trump has just backed an increase in the gas tax of 25 cents per gallon. That's a 235% increase. So you're probably, it's going to be significant. You are going to feel that pain. Now, in theory, this is how Trump is going to fund his repair of America's infrastructure, including upgrades and replacements of roads, bridges, tunnels, and so forth and so on. I don't think this tax is going to do that. I think it's going to wind up being spent on the war, because that's where all of our money is going. That's why our infrastructure is in the condition that it's in, is because the money that was supposed to be maintaining the upkeep of all this infrastructure was instead spent on bombs, bullets, and bandages. If you want to get this country back on track, you stop all this warmongering. You close all those foreign military bases, you bring all of our people back home, and you put this country back to work on this country. Get the Army Corps of Engineers to go on out and start doing some of this repair work on the infrastructure. It's where we need to go here. Let's see. Okay. Sorry about that. Now, getting on to immigration, somebody is taking it upon themselves to start issuing mass warnings to illegal immigrants, warning them where the ICE sweeps and arrests are taking place, which is currently in Florida and in Southern California. All right, we're going to take a break here. I got to go check with Claire, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're talking about issues of immigration, refugees, and apparently over in Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban's anti-immigration campaign is now taking aim at U.S. billionaire George Soros, who has been just pumping all kinds of money to boost open-door organizations in Eastern Europe. And apparently there's an anti-immigration bill that's going to the Hungarian parliament. It's actually nicknamed the Stop Soros Bill. And this bill would enable the Interior Minister to ban all non-governmental organizations that back migration and jeopardize national security. And I think that's just common sense, because these NGOs are how these troublemakers go on in and mess up other people's countries. And Putin was absolutely right to start shutting the NGOs down in Russia, because he caught them trying to stir up trouble, and Hungary needs to do the same. Now, I'm sure that Brussels is going to fight back on this, and so will George Soros. My concern is that there's so much anger as to what's going on that it could turn into an actual civil war in the streets of Europe between the indigenous Europeans and all these so-called refugees. Let's see. Story here. Apparently up in Sweden, there was a police officer who basically blew the whistle and came on out. And police officer Peter Springer basically came on out and said that the gang rapes are mostly the work of the immigrants. Well, in Sweden, which is a very liberal country, it is illegal to mention the ethnicity of criminals, even though Sweden has become the rape capital of the world right now. So he just came on out and he said this. Now he's in legal trouble. He's the one who's in legal trouble. And meanwhile, the women of Sweden are still getting raped. Now, things may not be going well for Angela Merkel over in Germany, and it has to do with this coalition government she thought she had formed. And as it turns on out, the sudden resignation of Martin Schulz. And so there is now doubt that this coalition deal is going to work. That will force a new election. And Merkel barely squeaked through the last one, and she's less popular today than she was before. So it may be the end of that as well. Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg is warning the European Union's Brexit negotiator Michael Barnier that the United Kingdom will not roll over and accept abiding by the EU's regulations once Britain leaves the bloc. I mean, that's what the Brexit negotiators are actually saying. Once you are officially no longer part of the European Union, you will still obey the dictates of the European Union. Of course Britain's not going to go for that. That's the whole point of leaving the EU. They're tired of Brussels just coming on in with all kinds of gratuitous, nitpicky regulations. I mean, there are even EU rules on how big the produce has to be to go into the produce section of a supermarket. And the end result there's a lot of waste. Produce that's too small or too big gets thrown in the trash. And Britain is tired of that. And Britain is tired of all of the refugees. And Brussels is trying to basically strip Brexit of any real teeth by saying Great Britain is still going to have to pay money because there's a huge budget shortfall being caused by Britain's departure, and Britain is still going to have to accept the refugees, and now they're demanding that Britain will have to obey EU mandates even after it leaves. It's a Brexit in name only if the EU gets their way. Meanwhile, there is this huge fight going on between the EU and Poland and Hungary, which is complicating the issue, along with the fact that when Britain leaves, Brussels is going to lose a huge chunk of their funding because most of the EU is in serious economic trouble. They've been impoverished by that private central bank, the European Central Bank. The only economies that were still strong enough were Germany and Britain, and they've been carrying the load for the entire EU. And if Great Britain leaves, it's a guarantee the people of Germany are going to say, look, we're not going to do this all by ourselves. So the EU is definitely straining, it's cracking, it's fragmenting, and George Soros is out there with a roll of duct tape trying to tape it all back together because he dreams of a one-world government with his own rear end sitting on that golden throne of planet Earth. And I don't think that would be a very good idea. When you look at the fact that this guy collaborated with the Nazis, he's Jewish, and he helped the Nazis grab other Jews. Nice guy, really nice guy. And even worse, he doesn't even feel guilty about it. He's on TV interviews. He feels no guilt about it at all. He thinks he's superior. He thinks he's a god. We're going to be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And again, the corporate media, Florida, 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 Florida. And they're trying to say there's all these new developments, but there's nothing new. They're just regurgitating the story and replaying the videotapes from yesterday. And again, this isn't news reporting. It's a sales campaign. And to nobody's surprise, of course, all the celebrities and the liberals are out there saying, see, we have to have a gun ban now. Really, liberals? How many more schools are you going to shoot up before you realize that we don't want to go along with that? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And don't start going on about those 17 kids who died at that school, because if those teachers had been carrying, there'd be only one dead body. Or maybe even zero. Do you think this kid would have walked onto that campus knowing he could be shot the instant he started pulling the trigger? Of course not. That's what deterrence is all about. And that's a good reason to have all the teachers armed. Ever been to Israel? Everybody has a gun there. There are no mass shootings. Let's learn from the Israelis in this one case. Everybody gets a gun, the mass shootings go away. Or if they start, they don't last very long. They're not that massive. Every time the liberals disarm us all, they're setting us up to be more targets. And every time they want another bloody mess to sell the anti-gun agenda, we're all at risk. Because these mass shooters are always going to areas where there are no guns, like schools and movie theaters and shopping malls. You don't see them trying to do a mass shooting down in the ghetto. They know there's lots of guns down there. They're going to get plugged good and solid. Anyway, getting on back to this other thing. Apparently up at the National Security Agency in Fort Meade yesterday morning, a driver tried to enter the secure campus. Didn't have the correct permits, apparently crashed into the gate. Somebody, they don't know who, opened fire. Gunshots were fired during the incident, but officials say that no injuries resulted. Guess there's a lot of people who don't like the NSA. Maybe it's some guy who had his invention stolen by the NSA. That does go on. That does go on. Now, let's see. Article coming with this science and health stuff. This is a YouTube video. Apparently, Monsanto has known all along that glyphosate is a cancer risk. Remember, the World Health Organization has labeled it a probable human carcinogen. They would have said definite, except for Monsanto's very powerful and capable lobbying efforts. And there's a new book out by Carrie Gillum, which reveals how Monsanto basically worked to keep it hidden that their weed killer was going to cause cancer. It makes money. And if it makes money, it's good. And you people coming down with the cancer, you're just being picky. You're obviously anti-capitalist if you complain about toxic products here. Over in Germany, they're going to phase out all glyphosate herbicides as fast as possible. That's a direct quote. They know how dangerous that stuff is. And here's where Monsanto really fell down. The pests, the weeds, are developing a resistance to glyphosate. That Roundup Ready gene is contaminating weed plants. And now the weeds are not touched by glyphosate. The weeds aren't being harmed by glyphosate. Only the farmers, the agricultural workers, and those of us who are eating the food that's soaked in this stuff. And by the way, they spray glyphosate on the produce at the supermarket because it acts as a preservative. Less spoilage, less loss, more profit. The fact that it makes people sick and could cause cancer, not really a factor here. Now, the other day I was talking about how Bush was really kind of smoking opium when he came out with that comment about how we should love the illegal immigrants because they'll pick the crops in the farm fields. And I pointed out that, in point of fact, crops are not picked by hand labor anymore. They're picked by machinery, these giant combines and so forth and so on. And apparently, these farm tractors, like John Deere, these companies, they're doing the same thing with their farm equipment that automobile manufacturers are doing with our cars. They're making it more difficult for the end user to repair them so that you will be forced to take your car or your farm equipment to an authorized, licensed repair person who will charge you a bloody fortune. So there's this story about how farmers are learning to hack their own tractors. And they talk about this Kyle Schwarting. He's a farmer by trade and a hacker by necessity. And his farm is located 20 minutes outside the city limits of Lincoln, Nebraska. And it's full of tractors and agricultural equipment, which he picks up in various states of repair, fixes up, and he resells. And what he's had to do is he's had to find this piece of software that John Deere uses to communicate with the vehicles, the farm equipment, to find out what's going on. And so Schwarting found a hacked version of John Deere's Service Advisor software on a torrent site. He's put it on a laptop, wired up his own little USB to tractor cable, and now he's able to basically talk to the farm equipment and find out what's going wrong. Now, a lot of states are starting to talk about a right to repair. And to me, that's just common sense. When I was a kid, everything was built so that you could repair it yourself. Very simple, very elegant engineering, farm equipment, cars, everything, TVs, everything. TVs had little glass tubes in the back that glowed. When they burned out, you'd go down to the supermarket or the pharmacy, and there'd be a testing machine. And you'd test it, you'd buy the replacement tubes, and you'd go home and get the TV working again. And to me, that just made incredible common sense. But over the last 2 decades, we have seen this tendency for American corporations to make products that cannot be repaired by the end user. Obvious example, of course, is the iPhone. You can't open that up. You can't change the battery. You have to take it to a licensed repair person who will cost a lot of money. But a lot of states are looking at legislation that will say, if you want to do business in this state, you will make your products so people can fix them themselves. The right to repair your property. And I think that's a really, really good idea. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Tom in Connecticut. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. Just to the point about teachers with guns. I don't know how many would be imbued with the wherewithal to actually draw down on a human and enter a firefight. It's kind of a known thing. Like it was a classic in World War II that all these guys could pick off targets from 200 yards, but they couldn't really shoot at a human.
Well, it does take a lot to shoot at a human, but to try and kill a human. But you can always shoot to injure. But again, the main point here is not to actually get into a firefight, but to give a potential shooter like this Nicholas Cruz a reason not to show up at all.
Sure, that could happen. Yes.
Okay, and obviously you would want to talk.
Yeah.
Obviously, you'd want to talk to teachers who had prior military experience, and again, even if all they have are tasers, just get something there. Don't just leave all these kids totally exposed out there without any protection, which is their guaranteed right under the Second Amendment. But again, the idea is not to actually have a gunfight, but to basically discourage one. And if Cruz had shown up at that high school and noticed that a whole bunch of teachers were carrying open, where he could see the guns before he walked on in, he might have turned around and gone off and gone to a movie theater for the afternoon. That's the real goal of arming the teachers and staffers at a school, not so that they can shoot somebody, so that they don't have to.
Point taken. Okay, thank you. Take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And let's see. I have to send a message to our control room. Something has come up regarding our stolen car, and I'm going to have to leave at the top of the hour, and we're going to have a best of tape for the rest of today's show. And I apologize to everybody, but we got the call from the insurance company, and something apparently weird has happened with the remains of our car, and we have to go take care of that. Anyway, getting on back to these Intel CPU design flaws or mandated backdoors, apparently already malware is starting to surface that exploits these. And people are being encouraged to install the patches on these Intel computers. And unfortunately, the patches are slowing these machines down. You're not getting the speed that you pay for. If you're engaged in rendering or animation production or just cryptocurrency mining, you're taking a major, major hit. This is not an ideal workable solution. Story coming out of Global Research up in Canada. Corporate giant demands crackdown on independent and alternative internet content, calling for online censorship. And we are hearing this more and more. Apparently, there was a public statement by Keith Weed. He's the chief marketing officer for the London-based multinational Unilever, basically saying that they're going to withdraw advertising from social media platforms that fail to suppress toxic content. Now, it sounds like this is a good idea. Nobody wants toxic content. And certainly nobody was paying attention to the obvious toxic content that Nicholas Cruz was putting out there on YouTube, which may be a reason to leave it up there so that people can spot this stuff in the future. But the problem is, of course, toxic content is very ill-defined, and it can be twisted to mean anything. Certainly to Israel's government, anything that questions the Holocaust is toxic content. Anything that talks about the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement would be considered toxic content. Anything that talks about what the conditions of the Palestinians would be considered toxic content. And so I have to draw the line here and say I'm willing to deal with toxic content to not have to deal with censorship, because the censorship is going to be more destructive. And we all know that the corporate media wants the internet and independent media to go away. We've stolen a huge chunk of their audience. We have removed from them their ability to lie to the public with impunity, and that's what they make their money on. Lying to the public, tricking the public into paying carbon taxes or into wars or electing Hillary Clinton. and they can't do that anymore. We're going to take another phone call here. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both. I can tell that they're having way too much fun with this Lakeland, Florida deal, but you know something? After they reported it on the local news here in Raleigh, North Carolina, one of the announcers at the news station ended up making a comment that in light of what happened in Florida, that a high school in Johnson County, as of sometime in May, is going to be conducting a active shooter drill. And I thought, oh gosh, you've got to be kidding me. So in about 2 months from now, they get to entertain the thought of an active shooter drill at a high school in that county, which is not, actually it's about one county away from Wade County in North Carolina. So it's like, oh gosh, please. So if there's any commentary or news going out about, oh, there was this going on, you'll know what it was. I can't believe they're using that for a cover story months beforehand. So, and blame it on Florida.
Well, the problem I have with these so-called active shooter drills is they're not actually teaching the teachers and the students how to survive and get out of there in an orderly fashion. These active shooter drills usually involve cops coming on in dressed as terrorists and firing off blanks to traumatize the kids, to make them hate the idea of a gun, rather than to learn how to deal decisively with a genuine threat.
Well, that's true, too, especially given that in Johnson County, it's a very rural area. So that wouldn't surprise me one bit, especially since it's near I-95 as well as I-40. So anyway, have a great one, and good luck with the vehicle.
Yeah, thanks an awful lot. I mean, I don't know the details, but they just said we got to get on over there and find out what's going on. So thanks an awful lot. Mike in the control room just mentioned that in hour number 3 today, they're going to replay the February 1st show, the interview with Greg Felton, because we got a lot of very positive response on that. So you'll want to stay tuned for that, and that'll be at the top of the hour. Now, there is a lawsuit going on right now between PragerU versus YouTube. And what it has to do is YouTube, like Facebook, like so many of the other social platforms, they try and maintain the illusion that they're not showing any political bias and they're not claiming censorship. But this one group, PragerU, basically discovered that, more than 40 of its educational videos are being suppressed by Google-owned YouTube. And basically, you can be suppressed, you can be put way down in the sort order just by people disapproving, voting you down, or Google not agreeing with the point of view presented. And it's another indicator that we really do need to treat the internet as a public utility and not as just another corporate media content delivery platform. But this lawsuit, if they win it, it's going to be a major shock to people like Google and Facebook, because it will say, yeah, they are in fact imposing their particular liberal slant on everything that crosses their platform. And we need to basically have a fair and balanced discussion. And we're not getting it. Not from these large corporate social media companies. We're getting the liberal side of the discussion only. We keep hearing all the time about how conservatives are being suppressed. Apparently some of my articles cannot be posted to Facebook. They're immediately deleted, like all wars are bankers' wars. All right, we're going to take a break here. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, catching up on some headlines. Apparently, law enforcement in Florida, according to a report in the Tallahassee Democrat, local law enforcement says they cannot find any actual link between the Republic of Florida white nationalist militia group and school shooter Nicholas Cruz. Remember when I said a white supremacist group with a Hispanic? I don't think so. Apparently it wasn't so. It was somebody's propaganda, and there's a ton of propaganda being dished on out. You probably saw earlier in the day there was this report going around that Donald Trump had somehow made it easier for mentally ill people to buy guns. That one has been shot down as fake news. Everybody is trying to use this for their own agenda, and the gun grabbers are out there in full force. They want the guns, specifically assault rifles, because assault rifles can be used to defend the people against an abusive government. That's why they're targeting the assault rifles. That's why every time they stage one of these false flags, they use an AR-15. Go on out and look at real crime statistics. Criminals don't use an AR-15. It's too big. You can't conceal it. They use small, cheap handguns. They want the AR-15s because they want to strip the American people of their ability to fight back against abusive governments, which is what that Second Amendment is for. The Second Amendment isn't about target shooting. It's not about hunting. It is about the people having the means to force the government to mind its own business. Remember, there is no freedom without the freedom to say no. And if the government gets the guns, we will have lost our ability to say no to abusive government. We will be slaves. Armed people are free. Unarmed people are slaves. There's a lot of fake news going on. Okay, if you are a dog lover, and I'm certainly one of them, although I don't currently have a dog, apparently, there is a problem with dog foods made by the J.M. Smucker Company. They're withdrawing some Gravy Train, Kibbles and Bits, and Skippy wet dog food products. Apparently, these products were contaminated with pentobarbital. Now, Smuckers is saying it's a very low amount and it's not harmful. Unfortunately, there are other stories saying that animals have died immediately after eating the food. Now, pentobarbital is a lethal drug. It's used to euthanize dogs, cats, and some horses. It is not allowed to be used. In fact, it's illegal to use on any animals that are part of the food supply. It's against federal law. So I don't know if Smuckers is the victim of industrial sabotage, but it is very, very sad that somebody would actually consider doing this. Ted Cruz is now on the warpath against Google and Facebook. He is thinking that they are monopolies, and they are too big monopolies to serve the public interest. Oh, and by the way, if you have fine wood furniture in your home, stay away from Apple's HomePods. Apparently there is some chemical in the base that when you leave it for a while and you pick it up, it leaves a white ring on wood surfaces. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. Claire and I are getting out of here, and we're going to replay that January 1st show and the interview with Greg Felton. So we'll see you tomorrow, and stay tuned.